Hello and welcome to the Haaretz Podcast. I'm Alison Kaplan-Summer in Tel Aviv. It seems impossible to imagine that human hunger and starvation, men, women, and especially children deprived of sustenance, could either be used as a weapon of war or, even worse, a political football. But that is exactly what has happened in the Gaza Strip. Deprivation of food has been a major issue since the earliest months of the war between Hamas and Israel. But it reached a new intensity this year when Israel openly followed a policy for several months of depriving humanitarian aid to Gaza until it finally caved to pressure coming from the White House. Aid is now coming in, but there is not enough, and the crisis continues and worsens. The firestorm right now surrounds a United Nations expert body on food security, an organization known as the IPC, which has just released a report saying that its highest phase of famine has been confirmed in Gaza. According to the report, quote, over 500,000 people in the Gaza Strip are facing catastrophic conditions characterized by starvation, destitution, and death. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rejected the report as a, quote, modern blood libel, and has accused Hamas of, quote, stealing aid to finance its war machine and staging a starvation campaign. Netanyahu called the IPC report an outright lie. Israel, he said, does not have a policy of starvation. Israel has a policy of preventing starvation. Before the report, the Israel Defense Forces declared, quote, there are no signs indicating a widespread phenomenon of malnutrition in Gaza. Here with me in the studio to discuss this disturbing and heartbreaking situation is a journalist here at Haaretz who has reported deeply on the problem and can hopefully help us shed light on where the truth actually lies. My conversation with Yarden Michaeli coming up.
I'm Esther Solomon, Editor-in-Chief of Haaretz English. Around the world, the fight is on to preserve critical and independent media. Haaretz, Israel's oldest newspaper, upholds its long tradition of accurate, committed, and incisive journalism, refusing to bend its reporting to pressure from any government or leader. A digital subscription to Haaretz gives you up-to-the-minute news and analysis in English from journalists who live Israel's reality and are committed to covering the Middle East and its global repercussions. At the same time, your subscription supports the cause of a free press that holds the powerful to account in Israel and around the world. I invite you to become a subscriber to Haaretz now. Just go to Haaretz.com and use the code Haaretz10, that's Haaretz with the number 10, for 10% off an annual subscription.
Yarden Michaeli, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yarden, I want to talk about the information wars, but let's begin with your important reporting. You and your colleague, Nir Hasson, who podcast listeners here know, I've had him on several times, have just published a really disturbing but really important article. It's not the first piece that you've written on hunger in Gaza, but I think it's the most devastating one. The headline reads, Starvation is everywhere. Virtual tours of Gaza clinics expose the scale of the horror. Your article was aimed to show the faces and bodies behind the numbers. When it was published last week, mid-August, you reported that there were more than 270 in Gaza dead from starvation, some 2,000 people shot to death while trying to obtain food, thousands of children under age 5 suffering from severe acute malnutrition, tens of thousands of children in the same age group who are suffering from acute malnutrition, and more than 500,000 people who are forced to endure entire days without food. This article got special treatment at Haaretz, both in English and in Hebrew. Instead of a lead photo on our main page, the lead image was a warning that the article contains disturbing images of starving children in Gaza. So Yarden, tell us about how this article came about, how it was executed. It sounds complicated. Basically, it looks like you and Nir made your best attempt to report from the ground without actually being able to enter Gaza. So where did you visit virtually and what did you see?
Sure. So that's a good place to start. So like you mentioned, the heart of this project is us going on virtual tours in places that are inaccessible to journalists. We wanted to see it with our very own eyes. a lot of images that are being published get attacked for being from Yemen or from Syria or from 2021, or people claim that they were created by AI. And we thought that it's going to make sense for us to go and try to make the maximum effort to be there as close as it gets to be there in physical form. We reached out to as many people that we could inside the strip. There were plenty of logistical hurdles to pass in order to do that. And we managed to tour 4 locations across the strip. So one of them is the pediatric ward in Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis, where we met the head of the pediatric department, Dr. Ahmed Al-Farah. We had a very lengthy tour with him in which he took us between patients and explained about their condition. We could see it. It took about an hour, and it was very, very detailed. We visited also the internal medicine ward in the same hospital a few days after. We could see more adult patients that were hospitalized there. And then we visited also 2 health centers in different locations across the strip where they offer treatment and care for children that are still not being hospitalized, but are still in very severe conditions.
Since this is a podcast and we're not looking at the photos, tell us what the children looked like and the adult patients as well.
Yeah. So to be honest, it was just hard to watch. It was heartbreaking. In the pediatric ward specifically, it was very noticeable. They were very thin. They were weak, glazed eyes, clearly severely malnourished. Some of them had a lot of markers of starvations that we could notice on their hair, for example. So people suffering from starvation, it might express itself with a change to their hair color, missing spots of hair on their heads. And we're talking about young children. So they're losing hair. One of them was losing teeth, just an infant. They had rashes on their skin. And it was just devastating to see them. Some of them had some additional conditions that's being brought up now constantly, but some of them were perfectly healthy. And we had the opportunity to, via those tours, to also meet their mothers that were there with them, and they could explain how they reached this condition. So something which is very common right now in the strip is that breastfeeding women are also severely malnourished themselves, and due to being starved, they can't breastfeed their infants. And with prices being high or with food not being accessible, so they're having a very, very hard time getting formula. Sometimes one of them mentioned that she was asked to pay $100 for a tin can. So that's something which is not manageable for them. They can't do that. And they told us that due to those situations, they just can't feed their children and they end up in those wards.
So your tour guides were doctors, local doctors, and volunteer doctors?
A lot of Palestinians are afraid of speaking with Israelis. Also, the local NGOs and other people, they have difficulty speaking with us. So a lot of the logistical hurdles that we had to go through was in order or how to find people that would be willing to communicate with us. So I can't reveal the names and identities of everybody that helped us. But in any case, everybody were officials. It wasn't just some random people, UN officials on the ground that in certain cases toured the ward, and they had a local doctor with them. And then the doctor would speak with the patient and they would gather information. So that was, for example, the situation in the internal medicine ward in Nasser. And over there, that's the place where we met actually the more adults, people that were getting shot, trying to reach food around GHF centers. And over there, we met teens. The
GHF is the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is the American-Israeli apparatus that was set up in order to have an alternative route of providing humanitarian aid and food aside from the normal UN and other humanitarian group channels.
Exactly. And around those places, due to the chaos, we know that there's been a lot of shooting, the IDF that was revealed in investigations published here at Haaretz. routinely used live ammunition at people that were trying to just desperate to get food. And that's also a marker of how desperate the situation is, just the fact that people are willing to risk their lives knowing that they might get shot, and they still come again and again and again. So the current number is around 2,000 people that were shot trying to get food. And we met those poor people at the hospital. Some of them had no pre-existing conditions, and now they have wounds. And it's important to note that starvation also affects on the body's ability to heal. So a lot of them, in a normal condition, they might get out of it quicker, but at the moment, it's just like very difficult for them.
So you spoke to a lot of volunteer foreign doctors in Gaza, and some of them who have been in and out or outside of the country. So here is the video testimony, the audio version of one of them who was included in your article, Saira Hussein.
My name is Sarah Hussein. I'm a doctor volunteering at Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis in Gaza. I've been here for the last 3 weeks. I was last here in October 2024 for a month. And one of the first things I noticed when I came back this time was how thin my colleagues have become. The other thing that was also very stark to me was the state of the patients that we were seeing. Men and women are just skin and bones. The children that we are seeing are not healing well because they're incredibly malnourished. In fact, they're not malnourished, they're starving, and it's an enforced starvation due to the Israeli blockade of food. The staff are continuing to turn up to work. They are hungry, they are fainting on the job. I had to put up IV drips on my colleagues because they're so dehydrated. Israel has taken out of action one of the last desalination plants in the area, further limiting clean water for the population. I honestly don't know how these people are going to survive. Generally, survive the illnesses that they have, for which they don't have appropriate medication, and survive the cruel injuries that have been inflicted upon them by missile strikes, gunshot wounds, or shooting.
So Yarden, is Dr. Hussein's experience typical of what you're hearing from the foreign volunteers?
Yeah, exactly. So it's very typical. And let me put it this way. We spoke with 12 doctors, some of them by video, some of them by phone calls, some of them came out recently. And we presented it as an open question. Did they experience hunger? Did they notice it? Is it an issue? Maybe it's not an issue. And the answer across the board was that it's just all over. Each doctor, from their point of view, could describe to us where they meet it. So some of them were plastic surgeons. Some of them were anesthesiologists. And they could mention where they see it. So let's say that one person told us that when they see patients in the operating room, they can count the ribs from the other side of the room. Another doctor, Dr. Noor Sharaf, she was in Shifa Hospital, and I spoke with her just a few days after she got out of Shifa. That's in Gaza City, where the situation is more severe. So she was back in the States, and she could describe that she didn't need labs, tests, something like that, in order to prove for her as a physician that people were starving. She could just feel it with her own hands. Even outside, for example, another doctor, Dr. Graham Groom, and that was in May, so prior to the current situation, he told us that every time that he would go outside to get some fresh air out of the hospital door, bands of children would groups would group around them with pots and pans and would just beg for food. He was saying those starving children. And that kept repeating itself, no matter who we spoke with. And more doctors. For example, a doctor named Dr. Irfan Ali, also from Texas. He was at El Ali Hospital, not too far away from Shifa, also in Gaza City. He mentioned that he could notice low levels of hemoglobin in his patients that, according to the files that he saw in front of me, could attribute that to the fact that they were starving. So it materialized all across the board in various locations of the Gaza Strip, over months. This is what I'm saying. It's not just now. There was a doctor called Dr. Mimi Sayad, also from the States, and she was in Dir el-Balach, in Al-Aqsa Hospital in December 2024, that is. And one day she went out of the hospital and just took images of children running around. And she sent me a batch of those. By the way, we had ways to verify the authenticity and the location and the time in which those images were sent to us. So we went through this process. And in those images, we could see that even children running out in the street, all of them were under 7, they had changes to the color of their faces, they had missing hair, this phenomena of the hair changing its color. So the markers of acute malnutrition were visible on children in the street already back then.
You and Nir wrote that you were able to document the current condition and, when possible, the medical history of some 50 children and some adults who are suffering from severe acute malnutrition. How did you manage to do that? I mean, you're, talking about putting together a lot of testimony. There are so many accusations coming out of Israel from a lot of Israeli officials of fake and manipulated news. Do you feel confident that what you saw and heard in this virtual reporting project was true and accurate?
Yes, completely, of course. We managed to collect testimonies directly from doctors that were treating them. We collected information from official organizations that were in touch with the patients who are treating them. I mean, it was as close as it gets to being there and looking at this board with information ourselves. We could see it in real time very often. And we were also clear about it. I mean, transparent that there were cases in which we couldn't say whether they had pre-existing conditions or not. And there were cases in which we could determine that they were. And we also made sure to explain what those conditions were, whether they had a child with Down syndrome, a child with cerebral palsy, various diseases. But let me put it this way. We met at Nasser Hospital a young woman. She was 25, and she had Crohn's disease. And the issue with her was that the food that she requires, the special food that she requires, wasn't available. So that meant that she was lying on the floor in the hospital, severely malnourished. She lost many pounds. And that just goes to show that also people with pre-existing conditions, they suffer from those same issues. They're just the first to get hit. In addition to all the doctors that we mentioned in the story, we also spoke with 4 more doctors. One of them is a pediatric professor in Columbia University. And we asked them about this issue of whether patients with pre-existing conditions, does it make sense?
This is all in the wake of the big scandal of the New York Times photo of the starving child, and then it was revealed as quote-unquote being fake because the child had a pre-existing condition.
Exactly. And all of those people we spoke with told us in a very clear way, this shouldn't happen. Like, it doesn't make sense. This is an indicator of starvation. One of the doctors told us that if she, as a doctor, sees a patient with chronic illness that would show up in her ward like this, they would call the police or social services to take care of the situation, because that's just not, they had to really extend their imagination to think about extreme cases. And it doesn't apply here in a situation where we see so many cases of people looking like that. I can also add that when we're working on this story, we decided to take out of our list, having said all that I just said, so cases that Netanyahu, for example, Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, blamed for being a fake case, and another fake case that the Israeli foreign ministry claimed to be a fake case. We took them out of our counting, although we could have let them stay there and make our list bigger. But we thought we can find other cases because there are just so many of those. It's just everywhere.
One of the most heartbreaking aspects of your reporting was the babies. We're all much more sensitive to those. You quote doctors as saying because of this early malnutrition, being deprived of breast milk and formula, some mother said that she was giving her child starch to give them calories. Because of the vitamin deprivation, the babies will suffer long-term effects, brain damage, and that children are going to have mental disorders because of the deprivation.
That's correct. I mean, babies, especially children, those are phases in the development where the brain develops, their body grows, and if it doesn't have the energy and the nutrients that it needs, then it's going to have long-lasting effects. There are studies that have been conducted about long-lasting effects. There's a variety of effects that might accompany those children. A point that I think it's quite important to make if we talk about ages. So a lot of the attention in this story, the attention is focused on children and their stories. But something that doctors told us is that children are the first to suffer from malnutrition and starvation, where it becomes visible on them because they have less reserves in their bodies. So it means that, let's say, an infant without food would perish in a matter of days. And then a teen, it would take longer. And then with an adult, it might take, some people would say, even months. You can think about hunger strikes that last dozens and dozens of days. The point is that the fact that now issues of starvation, the marks of starvation are visible also on adults, just goes to show that this whole situation is in an advanced stage of it. We're not at the beginning. We're far and deep into the process.
Nir Hasson, our colleague who reported the piece with you, just has a new piece up on Haaretz, an analysis commentary about this IPC report, about the information wars, fake news accusations. Nir wrote pretty strongly that Israel's attack on the report, which began even before it was released, involved all of the Israeli top ministries, Prime Minister's office, Foreign Ministry, Defense Ministry, Diaspora Ministry. And he wrote, the Israeli media, for the most part, has rushed to adopt the narrative that this is a biased and unreliable document. It is hard to believe that the propaganda will convince the world, but its main goal is different, to hide from the Israeli public the truth about what was done in its name. Do any of these criticisms hold water, what's coming from the official Israeli channels? Is this indeed a solid and reliable UN report, and the attacks on it coming from Israel are pure spin and unconvincing attempt to whitewash a horrifying reality?
To begin the answer to your question, let me just put it this way. For about 2 weeks ago, Prime Minister Netanyahu organized a press conference here in Israel where he announced that there's no starvation whatsoever in Gaza. 2 days after, the Defense Ministry released an announcement saying that after checking in a thorough investigation, they came to the conclusion that there are no signs of mass starvation in Gaza. So what I just described to you from our experience visiting all those wards directly contradicts and just goes to show how detached our announcements are. Now, in regard to the IPC report just came out, so the IPC, as background, is the world's highest authority on those issues. It's a collective of organizations created. Some of them are UN agencies, and some of them are other organizations within the humanitarian realm that they work together to make announcements and issue warnings where it's relevant in regard to food insecurity. And they've perfected their methods, and they're very rigorous. They have clear protocols. And in recent days, we've seen attacks, very aggressive attacks like that you just described on those methods. So one of the things, for example, that Israel has been claiming and accusing them of is that they intentionally changed the method in which they measure malnutrition in Gaza, that they lowered it, specifically here in Gaza, out of political reasons, in order to be able to declare that there's famine in Gaza because there's bias against Israel, etc., all those like the regular. So the fact is that there's a variety of methods that can be used in different situations. It's very difficult to follow and track and collect information in those situations when a country collapses, there's a civil war, or in a situation like Gaza. So according to the situation, they choose the method. And the method that was used here in Gaza is the same method that was used also in Sudan in an announcement that was made in 2024, if I'm not mistaken. It exists in their protocol. So there was no intentional change of information just in order to attack Israel. The IPC itself, so this collective, they have a policy of no speaking to media, no making announcements. We haven't seen an open press conference or something like that where they clarify information. But we did manage to speak with a person an expert on those issues who used to work there just until recently to discuss how they do it. And so we spoke with him, for example, and another expert called Professor Alex Deval. He's a world expert on starvation and hunger, has been dealing with those issues for 40 years. And both of them, and actually it comes from more directions, reiterated that the IPC committee that has to approve the findings is a conservative body. There were actually instances in which people thought across the world that a famine declaration should be made, but they were holding back because they thought that the information is insufficient. So that's the situation with this report.
What do you say to the statements of Israeli officials saying, we know how many calories we're allowing into the Gaza Strip. We know that it's enough to feed the population. The fact that it isn't getting to people, that's on Hamas. They are deliberately starving their own people. What do you say to that? And what do you say to the fact that Israel doesn't seem to connect the dots between the kind of displacement the Gaza civilians have experienced and their inability to get sufficient food and nutrition?
So I think it's a very important point what you're bringing up. We saw just recently, there was a report by the New York Times, and just a day before it, if I'm not mistaken, there was another report in Reuters saying, and both of them saying that according to military sources within the IDF, and also according to an analysis by USAID, there was no evidence of Hamas stealing en masse aid coming in. The New York Times report was reporting that according to officers within the IDF. I think it's important in regard to this whole theme to understand that starvation is a situation in which there is total collapse of society. And especially in Gaza now, after 22 months of a massive campaign of bombardment, of complete cities being razed and destroyed. So people they have nothing. They really have no means to sustain themselves. A lot of people are just trying to survive on a minute-by-minute basis. And when we talk and put this in the context of starvation, then the issue is not just about bringing in food. It's about making sure that the food is being distributed. It needs to be distributed equally. And then even if it's being distributed equally, it doesn't mean that it's being consumed. Let's talk about, for example, the bag of flour. In order to turn this into something that you can actually eat, you would need water, you would need heat to make it. But what happens
or pasta or rice.
Exactly. So all those ingredients and a lot of the ingredients that are being distributed by the GHF. So a lot of those require cooking. But what happens if your house was bombed and you were displaced 7 times, which is something that happened to many people inside Gaza? You have no money whatsoever. You have no cash. There's nothing around you which you can burn and use as fuel because this has also been consumed over the last 22 months. It doesn't mean that even if you manage to go through this whole process of making a trip to a GHF center, to manage to fight your way through all the people around you, to come back with a bag of flour in something that might take many hours for a regular person, to come back with it, it still doesn't mean that you're going to actually eat it. So just bringing in food into Gaza isn't enough, and this is something that the UN humanitarian system and all the other organizations around it have been explicitly saying, in order to elevate the starvation, to really deal with it, what's required is the full humanitarian apparatus, with aid being distributed close to people and not far away from them, aid being distributed also in a way that it reaches the weaker parts of society, and those are the people that we see now in those wards, so people with diseases, the elderly, breastfeeding women, all those parts of society that can't come in and, fight their way through to get food. And they need to have the means to also process and consume that food. And all that doesn't exist right now.
Yarden, I want to close with a more personal and emotional question. You are an Israeli. You covered the war since the beginning, the tragedy, the suffering on the Israeli side, the trauma of October 7th. You live and operate in mainstream Israel. What do you make of the fact that the hearts of good people that we all know, like, and respect seem to be somewhat hardened to this suffering because of what Israel has gone through, because of October 7th, because of the ongoing suffering of the hostages and their families. When your friends and neighbors maybe challenge some of the things that you're seeing and reporting, what do you think? How do you respond?
Personally, it's very difficult knowing what we know about what's going on in Gaza and seeing how normal things are here in Israel. We're currently in Tel Aviv, and the on-the-surface normalcy of what you see on the street, people sitting in cafes and restaurants. Of course, people, there are a lot of difficulties, and the country is in the process of being torn apart. But just the fact that this still exists, knowing that what that we just described exists very close to where we are at the moment, is just tearing me apart from the inside. It's very hard to go by with knowing that. And just in the story that we published, the images that we warned people that are disturbing images, there are many other images that we didn't put in. There's more information that came from doctors, and every time that I work on a story like that, I come to a conclusion that even if I know how bad things are in Gaza, all of us together, we just know a fraction. It's much, much worse. There's so much more that is going on there. I think that no crime, as horrendous as it is, with all the horrendous things that happened on October 7th, and they are horrendous and they're terrible, and all the torture that Israeli hostages have been going through, none of that justifies what Israel is currently doing inside Gaza.
Yarden Michaeli, thank you so much for your devastating and often hard to read reporting. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast and speaking.
Thank you for inviting me.
And that's it for this episode of the Haaretz Podcast. Thanks to my guest, Yarden Michaeli, and to producer and editor, Nir Hasson. If you want to continue to listen to the podcast, make sure you never miss an episode. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And please leave us a 5-star rating. That way more people can find us. And to keep up with all the latest news on Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish world, don't forget to subscribe and follow Haaretz.com. I'm Alison Kaplan-Summer, and until next time, shalom from Tel Aviv.